Section 1. Peace before the storm, before the chaos, before the flashing ambulance lights and the screaming neighbors. Our life was calm, simple, even peaceful. My wife, Laura, and I had moved into the Oak Ridge Estates community 5 years ago, chasing quiet. We'd been through a storm already. Her battle with cancer had taken most of our energy, our savings, and nearly our hope. The chemotherapy had left her fragile, her lungs weakened. She needed an oxygen tank to help her breathe on bad days. But despite the pain, she smiled more than anyone I knew. She had this habit of humming softly when the sun rose through our kitchen window, saying, "Every day above ground is a gift." Our home sat on the edge of the neighborhood, a modest two-story with blue shutters and a ramp I built myself for Laura's wheelchair. The ramp was the first thing that got the HOA's attention. They said it didn't match the community aesthetic. I explained that it was medical necessity. Their reply came in the form of a warning letter signed by none other than Karen Langford, the HOA president. "We have to maintain neighborhood standards," she wrote. "Please remove or modify the structure to comply with HOA design codes." I'd read it 3 times before laughing bitterly. Modify? What was I supposed to do? Ask my sick wife to crawl up the stairs. I tried to reason with her at first. I walked down to her perfectly manicured property, a 2-story colonial with the kind of garden you only get if you care more about image than life itself. Karen met me on her porch, arms crossed, wearing that practice fake smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Rules are rules, Mr. Dalton," she said coolly. "We all have to live by them. The board voted and the ramp has to go." "Then tell your board to come explain that to my wife." I shot back. Her smile faltered for just a second. "Don't get emotional," she said, turning toward her door. "If everyone gets exceptions, it won't be fair to the rest of us." That was my first warning sign. Karen didn't see people. She saw control. After that day, letters started showing up regularly. "Your garbage cans were left out past curfew." "Your grass is half an inch too long." "Your vehicle has a dent that lowers property value." Each message was signed by her pen, always ending with "Thank you for your cooperation in maintaining community standards." It became a running joke between Laura and me. But then, Karen noticed Laura's oxygen equipment. One afternoon, I found her standing on our porch, clipboard in hand, staring disapprovingly at the small compressor unit next to the front window. It was compact, quiet, and barely noticeable. But that didn't matter. "This," she said, tapping her pen against the machine, "violates the external appearance clause. It's unsightly." I clenched my jaw. "That's her oxygen. It keeps her alive." Karen raised an eyebrow, then put it inside. "She can't. It needs ventilation." "Well, I'm sure you'll figure something out," she said, writing something down. "You have 7 days to comply." For the first time in months, Laura cried that night, not from pain, but from humiliation. "How can someone hate us for this?" she asked through tears. I didn't have an answer. All I could do was hold her hand and promise I wouldn't let anyone hurt her again. The following week, we got another violation letter, then another. The HOA started fining us hundreds of dollars for noncompliance. Karen had turned our neighborhood into a personal dictatorship, and we were her latest target. The breaking point came one afternoon when Laura's home nurse arrived late. Her oxygen was running low, and the portable tank had been left charging outside in the sun. I was inside helping her eat when I heard the unmistakable sound of a plug snapping out of socket. When I stepped outside, Karen was standing by the outlet, the oxygen unit unplugged, her lips tight with annoyance. "I told you," she said coldly. "No unauthorized equipment outdoors." My heart dropped. "You unplugged her oxygen?" "It was a fire hazard," she replied, turning away. "You're welcome." That night, Laura's breathing became shallow, ragged. I sat by her bed all night, checking her vitals every hour, terrified I'd have to drive her to the ER. By morning, I knew one thing for certain. Karen had gone too far. That was the moment I decided this wouldn't just be another HOA argument. This was personal now. I had no idea just how deep her cruelty ran, or how completely I would destroy her world for what she did next. Section 2. The day everything shattered the day Karen crossed the line, forever started like any other tense morning in Oak Ridge Estates, silent driveways, clipped hedges, and people pretending not to see each other out of fear of being fined. I was out early taking out the trash when I saw Karen patrolling the street again, clipboard in hand. That clipboard had become her badge of power. She used it to humiliate people, to make them feel small. Laura's chemotherapy session was scheduled for that afternoon. Her doctor had warned us the treatment would be rough this time. Her oxygen levels had been unstable. I checked the compressor twice, made sure the portable tank was full, and kissed her before I left for work. I'll be back in a few hours, I told her. Ethan's coming by later to check the wiring. Ethan was my brother, a lawyer, sharp, fearless, and the one person I trusted to help us fight back if it came to that. But before he could arrive, Karen struck again. At around 1:30 p.m., while Laura was resting in her recliner by the window, Karen showed up at our door with two HOA board members in tow. They were there to inspect property violations. The compressor cable ran out to the porch socket again. Laura couldn't manage without it. The board members hesitated when they saw her weak and pale, but Karen's voice cut through the air. It's still a violation. She's been warned. Please, Laura said softly, her voice trembling. I'm on oxygen. I'm not breaking rules. I'm trying to breathe. Karen's lip curled. Ma'am, the HOA isn't responsible for your medical choices. You were told to keep that machine indoors. Laura tried to reach for her phone to call me, but before she could, Karen leaned down and pulled the plug. The hum of the compressor died instantly. Now, Karen said, brushing her hands off, you'll take this as a formal notice. We can't let one person ruin the look of this community. She turned and walked away as if she'd just swatted a fly. By the time Ethan arrived half an hour later, Laura was on the floor, gasping for breath. He called 911 and started CPR, managing to stabilize her until the ambulance came. When I got the call at work, I remember dropping everything and running for the door. My hands were shaking so hard I could barely start the car. When I arrived at the hospital, Laura was in a bed, oxygen tubes over her nose, her skin ghostly pale. The doctor told me bluntly, if she'd gone another 5 minutes without oxygen, she wouldn't have made it. Something inside me broke that day, something that would never heal. Ethan was pacing in the hallway when I found him. His eyes burned with fury. She did this, he said. That woman cut the power. I saw the plug on the ground. I nodded slowly. Then we're going to make her pay. That night, Ethan and I went through our security footage, every angle, every camera. We had recently installed a small outdoor camera above the garage after Karen had left a fake violation notice before. When Ethan pulled up the footage from that afternoon, we both froze. There she was, Karen Langford, standing on my porch, clipboard in hand. The timestamp read 1:32 p.m. You could see her bending down, reaching for the plug, and then, unbelievably, smirking as she turned away. Ethan paused the video and turned to me. That's assault, Mark. Interfering with life-sustaining medical equipment, it's a felony. I want her arrested, I said quietly. He nodded. Oh, she'll be arrested. But first, we're going to make sure her entire empire collapses around her. The next few days were a blur of paperwork, phone calls, and anger. Ethan contacted his colleagues at the state attorney's office to discuss pressing charges. Meanwhile, I started documenting everything Karen had done to us, every fine, every letter, every threat. Neighbors began whispering, too. Word had spread fast that something had happened at our house. Some people avoided eye contact. Others came to our door to offer quiet support. She's been pushing everyone too far, one man told me. Maybe now someone will finally stop her. Ethan dug deeper into HOA records, finding something shocking. Karen had been quietly redirecting HOA funds for maintenance projects that didn't exist. The board members she bullied into silence had signed off without knowing what they were approving. She'd built her little empire on fear and money that wasn't hers. This isn't just personal anymore, Ethan said, tossing a stack of documents onto my kitchen table. She's not only guilty of reckless endangerment, she's guilty of fraud. I stared at the papers. Then we take it all. Every dollar, every lie, she loses it all. Ethan smirked. Don't worry, I already made a few calls. By the time I'm done, Karen won't just lose her position. She'll lose her freedom. A week later, I returned home from a hospital with Laura. She was recovering slowly, her oxygen tank beside her. The whole neighborhood seemed quieter, eerily so. Karen hadn't been seen in days. But I knew she wasn't done yet. People like her never think they've lost. They always believe they're untouchable. What she didn't know was that Ethan and I had already set the stage for her downfall. We had the footage, the records, and a growing list of witnesses, and when the time came, we were going to make sure the entire county saw exactly what HOA Karen had done. Because she hadn't just violated an HOA rule this time, she'd nearly killed my wife. And no fine, no threat, and no apology could ever erase that. Section 3. The unraveling. Once Ethan set the wheels in motion, there was no gentle unpicking of Karen's threads. It was a slow, implacable harvest that exposed everything she'd tried to hide. He moved like a man who knew how to make committees and clipboards irrelevant, and while the county prosecutor opened a criminal investigation into interference with medical equipment and reckless endangerment, Ethan quietly filed civil claims that would force every ledger, every check, and every maintenance invoice into the light. We delivered to the DA's office the security footage of Karen unplugging Laura's compressor, time-stamped and unmarred, the hospital's emergency notes, proving how close we'd come to losing her, and sworn affidavits from neighbors who had until then been too scared to speak, the mail carrier who'd seen Karen's late-night trips to our porch, the landscaper who admitted he'd been paid twice for one job, and the treasurer who handed over email directives, showing how Karen routed HOA money through a shell account under her husband's contracting business. The prosecutor called it a pattern of petty tyranny cascading into felony conduct, and when the county auditor subpoenaed bank records, the paper trail was merciless. Duplicate payments, cash withdrawals timed the same nights Karen performed her inspections, and a small mountain of falsified receipts marked community improvement that ended up in her driveway in the form of private landscaping, and an extra car in her husband's name. Once those documents hit the judge's desk, the county placed liens on her accounts and froze the shell companies, a legal chokehold that made the glossy veneer of control crack fast. But law alone wouldn't silence the whispers that had been building. Ethan staged an information campaign with surgical precision, not to smear, but to mobilize. He organized a well-attended community forum where we showed the footage, the invoices, and the minutes Karen had altered, and something incredible happened. People who had nodded at her for years began to look at one another and say the things they'd been too frightened to voice before, the retired teacher who'd been fined for a bird. Feeder read her apology into the record. The young father who faced threats over his mother's ramp spoke of the sleepless nights. Even Tom, the HOA bookkeeper who'd kept the ugly receipts in a drawer out of fear, stepped forward and testified about signed checks he'd been ordered to rubber stamp. The local paper picked up the story, and within 48 hours the headline read, HOA president accused of endangering resident, embezzlement probe underway. And that publicity flipped momentum into our favor. Anonymous donors paid for extra legal filings so the county could continue its audit. Neighbors who once stayed silent signed affidavits, and national disability rights organizations contacted Ethan offering amicus support for the civil suit under the Fair Housing Act. Karen responded the way cornered people do. With fury and increasingly desperate theatrics, angry emails to homeowners, a flurry of demand letters accusing us of defamation, and a video of her claiming she'd only acted in the interest of community aesthetics. Her lawyer tried to file motions to dismiss and stall discovery, but Ethan was 3 moves ahead, using discovery to pull open the HOA's files and reveal the pattern of altered minutes and unauthorized expenditures. When the grand jury convened, they saw the bank reconciliations, the private payables to her husband's firm, and the message threads where she joked about making an example of anyone who didn't fit the vision, and that language, the casual cruelty, helped the prosecutor add charges for official misconduct and fraud to the reckless endangerment count. Meanwhile, the community didn't sit idly by. Under Ethan's counsel, they enacted an emergency measure to suspend the HOA's unilateral enforcement powers and appointed a county ombudsperson to oversee an interim committee. And with the county auditing the books, the HOA's discretionary fund was frozen and later returned to homeowners as part of a restitution plan. When the sheriff executed search warrants on Karen's home, deputies carted out boxes of paperwork and a laptop that contained drafts of bylaws she'd fabricated. Unilateral powers granting the president authority to remove nonconforming items, to levy fines without quorum, and to temporarily confiscate property cited as nuisance, language that, when shown in court, felt chilling because it was the playbook she used against us. Her husband's contracting license was suspended pending inquiry when auditors matched supposed maintenance checks to invoices submitted by his company that bore forged signatures. Neighbors who had paid expedited processing fees for approvals learned they'd been billed to their cards and the money rerouted. The receiver the court appointed moved quickly, and within weeks orders were issued to recoup funds, placing liens on Karen's personal property and on the rentals she'd used to funnel payments. The legal machinery that Ethan and the DA had coordinated transformed what looked like petty HOA squabbling into a full-scale financial reckoning. Karen's public persona crumbled on camera. Interviews went from confident to shrill, then to silence as sponsors she'd leaned on for neighborhood improvement withdrew support. The very people who'd once flattered her pretended ignorance and then, facing subpoenas and potential civil liability, began to flip, offering statements that pushed the criminal investigation into a conviction-ready posture. When the criminal indictment was finally unsealed, it contained counts for reckless endangerment, criminal mischief, theft by deception, and fraud. Charges that carried years of potential penalties, and the judge, watching the evidence, agreed with the DA's motion to revoke Karen's bond because of the risk she posed to the community and the likelihood she'd destroy evidence. Seeing her escorted from the court that day, residents watched the woman who had held their lives in her hand. Reduced to an accused defendant, Ethan didn't savor the spectacle. He used the arrest to finish the civil work. A consent decree was negotiated that required Karen to forfeit misappropriated funds, fund an accessibility trust for residents harmed by her policies, pay substantial damages to cover Laura's medical and emotional recovery, and resign any claim to HOA authority. The court-approved restitution plan also mandated mandatory training for remaining board members in disability law and transparent auditing procedures, so no, one could rig an association again. As the documents were signed, the neighborhood breathed out in a way that felt almost audible. Hedges that had once trembled under the weight of her scrutiny now settled, people walked their dogs without glancing over their shoulders, and neighbors began to plan small things again. Potlucks, a book club, a ramp-building workshop funded by the Restitution Fund and run by volunteers. By the end of Section 3, the net had closed. The prosecutor had enough for trial. The civil suit had secured an order for substantial damages and restructuring of the HOA. Karen's husband faced professional ruin. And the shell of power she'd built out of fear, forged minutes, and stolen money was being dismantled piece by piece. Ethan's approach had never been about vengeance for its own sake. It was methodical, legal, and restorative, designed to ensure Karen couldn't rebuild the kingdom. She'd used to punish the vulnerable. And as I watched Laura sleep that night, her oxygen steady and the compressor humming like a small, faithful engine, I felt a quiet, enormous relief. We had survived the worst, and the system we'd once feared had been turned to defend us. Section 4. The reckoning when the trial finally came. It wasn't the circus Karen had once imagined. It was quiet, cold, and devastating. The courtroom was packed with neighbors who used to fear her, sitting shoulder to shoulder with the families she'd fined, bullied, or humiliated. Karen tried to walk in with her chin up, wearing that same smug grin she'd used at HOA meetings, but when Ethan entered, calm, steady, with a stack of binders under one arm and Laura's medical file in the other, you could almost feel the temperature drop. The prosecutor opened with the footage, Karen yanking out the oxygen plug, muttering about rules and appearances. The sound of that plastic tube snapping free echoed through the courtroom. Even the judge's face hardened. When the paramedic testified about how Laura had nearly gone into cardiac arrest, several jurors wiped their eyes. And when Ethan took the stand, his voice didn't shake. He told them about the years of harassment, the fines, the humiliation, the fear of losing his wife not to cancer, but to cruelty. Every word hit like a nail sealing a coffin. By the second day, Karen's attorney was drowning. The financial evidence, embezzlement, forged minutes, falsified invoices, was irrefutable. Her husband's contracting business was exposed as nothing but a siphon for HOA funds. When confronted with her own emails mocking disabled residents as neighborhood eyesores, Karen broke down on the stand, first screaming that it was just a misunderstanding, then blaming everyone else, the HOA board, her husband, even the town. The judge had heard enough. When the verdict came, it was unanimous, guilty on all major counts: reckless endangerment, fraud, embezzlement, and interference with medical equipment. She was sentenced to 8 years in state prison, restitution exceeding $750,000, and a permanent ban from holding any HOA or community leadership position. Her husband lost his license, their assets were liquidated, and their house, the one she'd bragged about endlessly, was auctioned to pay the damages. But Ethan's revenge didn't end in the courtroom. He used the settlement funds to found a nonprofit for disabled homeowners, Laura's Law Initiative, which helped families fight HOA discrimination nationwide. News outlets picked up the story: HOA tyrant jailed after cutting woman's oxygen, husband turns tragedy into reform. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. Karen's name became synonymous with everything wrong about power abused in suburbia. The mountain community changed after that. The HOA was restructured under county oversight, new bylaws written with Ethan's input. Neighbors who had once hidden behind curtains now planted flowers on each other's lawns. They even built a new medical access shed behind our cabin, dedicated to Laura, with a small bronze plaque that read, "This community stands for life, not control." On the day Karen's house was finally seized, Ethan didn't gloat. He simply stood on the porch where her violation notices had once piled high, breathed in the clean mountain air, and turned to Laura, smiling, fragile but alive. "We didn't destroy her," he said softly. "We just took back what she tried to take from everyone else, hope." And as the sun dipped behind the ridge, the hum of her new oxygen machine filled the house like a heartbeat restored. The war was over, and the right side had finally won.